This is the immune system part 2, the innate immune system. So we talked a little bit in the prior video about the evolution of immunity, and we talked about the innate versus the adaptive immunity. And so we're just going to focus on innate first, which is a very general type of immunity. Why is this information so important? Up until recently, we've been having epidemics for a very long time. Millions of people die from certain diseases, and so our capacity to understand how the immune system works is very, very important. A lot of us, have the luxury of not having to worry so much about our immune system. We are relatively healthy potentially, and we get enough nutrients that we need for our immune system to function properly. Especially in countries that are impacted by malaria or something like that, their immune system potentially might be lower and therefore already more susceptible to different diseases. So this is an overview of the immune system. I would, sketch this out, make sure that you understand the two divisions. So there are two big chunks in the immune system, the innate immunity and the adaptive immunity. We are going to talk about the innate immunity in this PowerPoint, and then the last two PowerPoints will all be adaptive immunity. And so we'll talk about just innate today. Innate immunity is activated immediately upon being exposed to a pathogen. And when I talk about a pathogen, I'm talking about a bacteria, a dirt, something that is recognized as not self when we get a cut, when the tissue is damaged in some way. This is all technically pathogens or something that would activate the innate immunity. The first line of defense is obviously the integumentary system, that is the skin and the mucus and the pores and secretions. Skin and mucous membranes provide a very physical barrier, and our secretions like tears, sweat, oil, wax are toxic to bacteria, will trap it on the surface and keep it from getting beneath the epidermis layer of the skin and therefore into our bodies. Our body passages are also lined with certain membranes that help to prevent pathogens from getting inside. So although mostly our digestive system is open to the air, our trachea is lined with cells with cilia on them, this long, like finger-like projections that secrete mucus, and so pathogens are trapped there. The esophagus, which leads to the stomach, has a pH of 1 or 2, which is very, very acidic, even more acidic than the actual stomach. That kills pathogens. The urinary tract has a lower pH, so more acidic, and is flushed with urine, so that will kill anything. Our tear ducts have lysozymes, which are enzymes which will break down pathogens, and our reproductive tract also has a lower pH, so also acidic. Pretty much any opening you have to the outside world is going to be acidic or have enzymes that will break down pathogens, because those orifices essentially don't have the luxury of having physical skin. The second line of defense, as far as this type of immunity is, once we get past those barriers, are the phagocytes and the chemicals that are released. We activate phagocytes, we call them leukocytes or white blood cells. They're made in red bone marrow, and then they are stored in our connective tissue, the tissue lining the organs, and especially our lymph node, and it's circulated through the blood. On the left, we'll see how our leukocytes are made, or all of our white blood cells are made. There's quite a few different types, which we will go into. Again, this image is pretty important, and we will talk about what that looks like. When we're talking about all of this, we'll kind of be able to differentiate between all of these cells by the end of this information. When we're talking about leukocytes, right, so if we look back, we see that leukocytes are on the very far left of the white blood cells. The B and T cells are actually part of adaptive immunity, so just our neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils are the innate immunity portion. When there is some sort of invasion, so it gets past the barrier, the neutrophils are the first to arrive. They're very numerous. Billions of them are made each day, and they only survive a few days, and then they die, and then it is repopulated. The eosinophils are weakly phagocytotic or phagocytic cells. They kill invaders that are clumped together, and they also destroy parasitic worms. So when I say phagocytotic or phagocytic, that means that they engulf bacteria and things like that. Basophils and mast cells are going to be the most important leukocytes that we talk about. They are leukocytes in nearby connective tissue that produce histamines, which are released when a cell is damaged. And if you are allergic to something, you are very familiar with your basophils and mast cells, because histamines are what is released when you have an allergic reaction. Two other types of cells that, this is one type, but monocytes that end up becoming really large macrophages. They are involved in phagocytosis, so what the eosinophils cannot do, the macrophages will take care of. They are also important in the adaptive immune response, but as far as our innate immunity, they just engulf things that need to be engulfed. If we skip back really quick, so we've talked about the group of three, right? We've talked about eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils, and although it's not in here, we've talked about the mast cells as well. The dendritic cells are what we would consider like the king of the immune system. Dendritic cells are found in the skin, nasal passages, intestine, spleen, throat. They are not as common as the other phagocytotic cells. Dendritic cells are important to adaptive immunity as an antigen presenting cells, so they are phagocytotic or phagocytic when it comes to the innate response. And then these dendritic cells, essentially what they are used for in adaptive immunity is they present an antigen which allows the body to recognize what specific pathogen is present and then tailor the response to that specific presence. And so the antigen is what takes the copy of the pathogen, shows it to the body decides what it's going to do, and then it has a response. When we talk about all these different types of phagocyte cells, these phagocytes have TLR, or toll-like receptors, which recognize certain molecules. The phagocytes engulf the pathogens within a vesicle and deactivate or kill the pathogen. And so if my phagocyte recognizes that a certain pathogen is present, it will engulf it. Typically, it uses enzymes to break down the pathogen, and it just keeps going until the phagocyte itself dies. Phagocytes work very similarly to this process. The reception is the presenting of the pathogen, the signal transduction is the message that is sent inside the cell, and then the activation of the cellular response would be the engulfing of the cell and the digesting of it. Natural killer cells, they are not a phagocyte, but they can detect infected cells and cancerous cells due to different proteins that are floating around in the plasma membrane. They secrete chemicals into the infected cell that kills them or punctures it. It's called lysing, that punctures the pathogen. So they don't physically engulf it, but they will send chemicals out to break down those cells. There is an animation on YouTube if you would like to go look at it. So phagocytes can also activate chemical responses similar to our killer cells, like the inflammatory response and the production of antimicrobial peptides. So not only do they just engulf the cells, they can also start off a response that is chemical in nature. How do they do that? So we call them kinins or chemokines. They are peptides, which are proteins, and they're released by certain phagocytes. These molecules increase circulation and capillary permeability, so the goal would be to bring more immune system cells to the site of the pathogens. They also attract leukocytes to the injury area, and so if we look at the image above, our leukocytes actually use chemotaxis. If we think back to ecology, the idea of taxis is an organism moving towards or away from a chemical stimuli. And so when the chemokine concentration starts to increase quite a bit due to the phagocytes releasing it, the leukocytes will start heading in that direction. The other way that this chemical response might occur from a phagocyte are complement proteins. And they work through a variety of methods. These proteins are released by phagocytes, and they can create pores in the invading bacteria, causing water to rush in and then the cell to explode. They can attack the membrane. They can do all sorts of different things. So we see this is how they would make holes in the bacteria. Complement proteins along with antibodies will coat a bacterium, so this is another way that they might attack a pathogen. Basically what happens is the complement proteins will coat the pathogen, it will signal to a phagocyte, and the phagocyte will come and engulf the pathogen along with all of those complement proteins and digest the whole thing. But it basically sends out a signal to the pathogens to show up. The third type of chemical that might be released during the innate immunity are interferons, and these are proteins made by virus-infected cells. So what we know about viruses is they are non-living, and so they need a host, and so they will invade a self-cell. The one thing that the cell can do for itself is secrete an interferon, and it's transported to neighboring cells to prevent viral infection from the infected cell, basically sending a warning signal to any of the surrounding cells. The fourth type of chemical response is histamine, which is released by mast cells and basophil cells. This is specific, or the most common when we see allergic reactions. When the skin is penetrated or when a non-self pathogen is recognized, cells are ruptured and it releases chemicals to attract mast and basophil cells, and these cells release a chemical compound we call histamine. Histamine increases capillary permeability, the area becomes swollen and red, and the temperature increases, and our phagocytes start to work on that area. This is why if someone has a very severe allergic reaction, histamine will make them feel, or they will feel very itchy, their throat will swell up, their eyes will get really red, all of the above because of the impact histamine is having. A very basic way of looking at this is a pimple, gross but true. That wax that is trapped in the subcutaneous part of your skin is non-self. It is recognized as non-self, and so the inflammation is a way to try to remove that. Another example would be fever. This is another way to get rid of our pathogens, and that is your innate immune system.